Welcome to Silent Screams, where shadows speak louder than words. Tonight, we venture into the chilling tale of Room 207, a place steeped in whispers, shadows, and secrets. Settle in, but don't get too comfortable. This story has a way of creeping closer with every word. It began with Jack, a 32-year-old traveling salesman who spent most of his life on the road. Jack was no stranger to motels, small, off-the-beaten-path places that offered little more than a bed and a hot shower. That's all he needed, really. He never cared about the peeling wallpaper or the occasional questionable stain on the carpet. It was all part of the territory. But on this particular night, Jack stumbled into a motel in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and unknowingly into the most unsettling experience of his life. The motel looked unremarkable from the outside, a faded sign buzzing weakly with neon light that read, "Rest easy in." Jack pulled his car into the near-empty lot, his headlights sweeping across cracked asphalt and a scattering of tumbleweeds. He was bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that made his vision blur at the edges. Inside, the reception area smelled faintly of mildew and lemon-scented cleaner. A man with an oddly blank expression sat behind the counter. His name tag read, Tom. "Just one night," Jack said, sliding his credit card across the counter. Tom didn't respond right away. His eyes flicked to the screen of his outdated computer, then to Jack, then to a small, handwritten logbook beside him. Jack noticed that his hand trembled slightly as he flipped the pages. "Room 207, Tom said after a long pause. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his eyes seemed to hold something unspoken. Jack dismissed it as tiredness. Maybe the guy had been working a double shift. Jack took the key, a physical key, oddly enough, not one of those electronic cards most motels use nowadays, and headed up the narrow staircase to the second floor. The hall was dimly lit, the kind of lighting that cast more shadows than it dispelled. The air felt heavy, almost humid, as if the building itself was holding its breath. When he reached room 207, he hesitated. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the number on the door hung slightly crooked, or the faint scratch marks on the doorknob. Whatever it was, it made him uneasy. But he shook it off, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The room was ordinary. A queen-sized bed with a floral bedspread, a small table with two mismatched chairs, and a TV that looked like it hadn't been updated since the late 90s. The only unusual thing was the mirror. It was larger than necessary, taking up most of the wall opposite the bed. Jack thought it seemed out of place, but again, he shrugged it off. He set his bag down, kicked off his shoes, and sank into the bed. The springs groaned under his weight. He turned on the TV, flipping through static-filled channels until he found one that worked, a news broadcast he didn't really care about. As the sound of the anchor's voice droned on, Jack felt his eyelids grow heavier. He was just about to drift off when he heard it. A faint knocking. It wasn't at the door. No, this sound was coming from somewhere inside the room. Jack sat up, his heart thudding. He scanned the room, but everything was still. The knocking came again, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from the mirror. He stared at it, his pulse racing. The surface of the glass was perfectly smooth, reflecting the room back at him. But then, he saw it, a handprint, foggy and faint, appearing in the center of the mirror. Jack froze. The air around him felt colder, pressing against his skin like icy needles. The handprint didn't disappear. Instead, it began to move, as if someone were pressing against the other side of the glass, trying to get out. Jack stumbled back, nearly tripping over his bag. He grabbed the remote and hurled it at the mirror. The handprint vanished the moment the remote made contact, the glass shattering into jagged shards. For a moment, the room was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that made your ears ring. Then, the lights flickered, and Jack heard a whisper. It wasn't clear at first, just a faint murmuring that seemed to come from every direction. But as it grew louder, the words became clearer. "Why did you break it?" Jack spun around, his eyes darting to every corner of the room. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if someone were speaking directly into his ear. He bolted for the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. It was as if it had fused with the frame, refusing to budge. His breathing grew shallow as panic set in. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, stretching and curling along the walls like living things. One of them began to rise, taking on a vaguely human shape. Jack's legs felt like lead, his body frozen in place as the shadow moved closer. It had no face, just an endless void where its features should have been. Jack forced himself to move, grabbing a chair and swinging it at the shadow. The chair passed through it harmlessly, as though it were made of smoke. The figure didn't stop. It reached out, and though its hand never touched him, Jack felt a searing coldness spread through his chest, like frostbite seeping into his bones. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pulsing like a living thing. Jack's vision blurred, the edges of his sight darkening. Just as he thought he might black out, the door flew open, slamming against the wall with a deafening crack. Jack scrambled to his feet and ran, not daring to look back. He didn't stop until he was in his car, the engine roaring to life as he sped out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, the motel seemed to shrink into the distance, but as he glanced at the mirror again, his blood ran cold. In the back seat, a faint shadow lingered. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But Jack could feel its presence, heavy and unrelenting, as he drove into the dark, empty night.